right, guys, back at it again. Episode 3. We've got an interesting subject. Asatru / Heathenry. Who do we have with us?
This is going to be a really interesting show. Today we have Vincent Enlund. He is a chieftain of an Asatru Kindred. Please welcome Vincent.
Welcome to the show.
Oh,
Yeah, Vince, how's it going?
going good. It's going good. How about you?
I'm moderately keno. But enough about me. Let's dive right into it, man. What is the definition of Asatru? What is it?
So Asatru would be a pre-Christian tribalistic worldview, specific primarily to Germanic Scandinavian countries. And so I like to separate that because there's a difference within heathenry from like Asatru to say Odinism or Theodism or Fjornsed, which are all branches of Asatru. They're all or branches of heathenry.
Mm-hmm.
But they're all primarily European-based. So heathenry would be European, pre-Christian European tribalism. Asatru is very Germanic, Scandinavian, whereas some of the other things are going to be focused more in different areas. Theodism is very English, very Old English. Fjornsed is all about Sweden. Odinism is a whole nother different thing, all in and of itself.
Those guys.
And so, yeah. So I'm Asatru. Most of my practice is Swedish related because most of my ancestry is Swedish. But yeah, very Germanic, Scandinavian tribalist practice.
What does the word Asatru mean?
Asatru is an Icelandic term. So although the pieces that build the word are very old, the actual word was coined in the early 70s. And Asatru just means faith in the old gods. That's all it means. True to the old ways. Or the old gods. Actually, so old gods would be a more...
The true in the word Asatru means true.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. It means, true is in belief. So the literal translation would be belief in the old gods. And it's pronounced... Technically, I'm American, so I say Asatru. The actual pronunciation would be Asatru.
Asatru, okay.
Asatru. That's the Icelandic pronunciation. But I'm not Icelandic. I'm white trash American, so I just say Asatru.
So it's like the difference between karate and karate.
Yes, kind of like that.
It's karate. That's nice. That's perfect. So, you were going into it a little bit. What are the differences between Asatru and heathenry? Are there some defining?
So heathenry is like a broad term. And I like to talk about it as think of it like an umbrella, like a series of umbrellas. And so, paganism is like this really big, broad umbrella that covers everything that's not part of the big three. I mean, technically Buddhists are pagans. So paganism is this really broad, big term. Heathenry would be specific to Europe. It's traditional, pre-Christian, European pagan beliefs. Asatru is Germanic Scandinavian beliefs. So it's a part of that. So heathenry is just this broader term that covers more areas. It's a very generalized term. And so that's where we get to things like when you say Fjornsed. Like I don't refer to myself Fjornsed, although most of my practices are Swedish-based, because it's like if you're Buddhist, but you call yourself Shinto. That means you're Japanese Buddhist. Shinto is only Japanese. If you're calling yourself Fjornsed, that means you were born in Sweden and you're Swedish, because it's a Swedish term that is specific to Swedish Asatru. And if you're in Sweden and you were talking to somebody about that, they would tell you, Fjornsed is Swedish Asatru. They use Asatru as a generalized Scandinavian term.
Okay, so there would be, you go to the store, like fries or something, candy aisle, you got those red fish. They're not Swedish fish, but they try to pass themselves off. Okay, I got you.
Yes, that's...
Perfect. Excellent. All right.
So I have a question.
Oh.
Yes, ask away.
So, Asatru versus heathenry. I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but this is the big one that's on my mind.
Okay.
Theism, polytheism.
Yes.
Is there a difference between heathenry and Asatru when it becomes theistic, or is it even theistic to begin with?
No, I would say yes. So there's a fine line in heathenry because heathenry is a broad general term. And heathenry is more classified under worldview, which is where you start to get into how do you define worldview. Like, so for me, worldview includes religion. Worldview is everything. That's why it's called worldview. It is everything that makes up how you see the world and whatnot. But a lot of people view worldview as outside of the spiritual. You have your spiritual ideas, and then you have your functional worldview. So heathenry is more focused on a functional worldview rather than the whole big picture. And so that's why I say it's generalized. But heathenry in general, heathen beliefs in general are hard polytheistic. And so by hard polytheistic, I'll use the term hard polytheistic to separate it from like Hinduism, which is soft polytheistic. They have a bunch of gods, but all their gods are part of one bigger god.
Okay.
We are hard polytheistic. We have a bunch of gods, and they're all separate gods. And our gods aren't even all the gods. Other people have their own gods. And so it's a hard polytheism. The primary difference is when you talk to some people, and I even agree that this is kind of true, if you refer to yourself as a general heathen, you don't specify to any singular, regional belief system. You're just a general heathen. I believe you can hold a heathen worldview and not believe in actual gods. But the minute you start calling yourself Asatru or Fjornsed or Theod, you have to believe in gods. Those regional worldviews are very hard and specific to a polytheistic idea.
So when you say believe in gods, this is like an actual being that you believe in versus an archetype.
Yes. And so heathenry kind of has room for you could believe in an archetype. You could worship the gods as representations of powers within nature, not actual beings. Right. So heathenry kind of has that room for definition because it's a broader general term that's not focused specifically on any regional theistic idea. Whereas the minute you start saying, well, no, I'm Asatru, now if you want to start getting focused into Scandinavian tribalist belief, you have to believe in the gods.
Are those deities anthropomorphic to a sense?
Define your definition of anthropomorphic, because I've heard several.
Okay, so human-like qualities.
They can. Most people nowadays who are Asatru or heathen in general are fairly educated in the idea of what a god could be. I think, and most people agree with me that I've talked to, a god could present themselves with human qualities because they're a god. They could present themselves any damn way they want because they're a being outside of my specific definition.
So this is more than like a force within nature.
Independent,
right?
Like they're independent, self-defined being. Whether or not they choose to represent themselves in some type of humanoid form, I think is their call, because they're gods.
Do you believe that these gods manifest themselves to you?
No, I don't believe they manifest themselves to most people. And most heathens in general don't. Most heathen, whatever the specific regional heathen worldview you choose to keep, most heathens are very deist. We believe there are gods, but those gods aren't really focused on our lives as individuals. They don't. To be perfectly honest, they don't care that much about us. They're big picture creature. They're concerned with big cosmic frickin' crap beyond me. I'm literally this tiny little thing in the cosmos. Are they concerned about people as a whole? Sure. But are they concerned about me as an individual? I highly doubt it. And if they did, I should be worried about that. If a god is concerned with my daily life, and the lore talks about it, when you look at people who gods focus on within the lore, their lives are never great. They start out great because the gods are focused on them, so they give them lots of stuff. They never end well. Look at Sigurd. I mean, when you look at the Volsung and you look at Sigurd, this is somebody who Odin was focused on, and it didn't take long for his life to fall to shit. Because he's a human being, and when gods start messing with your life as an individual, it's usually for their own benefit and not for yours.
Interesting. So what are some of the practices surrounding Asatru?
So some of the practices, ideally, ancestor veneration is going to be a big one. And that's one that I push to most people, and that should be a primary. We have certain ceremonies, and these are things like bloat and stumble, which are two really big ones. Well, I'll say three. So there's bloat, there's a feigning, which is like an offering. A bloat is a sacrifice. Feigning is an offering. And then a stumble, which is like, it's a social drinking for the gods. We'll put it that way. We'll call it socialized drinking for the gods. And so these are three primary ones that a lot of people do in any kind of heathenry because they're well documented historically. and can be backed up archaeologically. So these are things that we know happened. We have tons of evidence to show. We have historical evidence, we have archaeological evidence, we have poetry and cultural evidence to show that these three things occurred. So they tend to be the big things that most people do. A bloat is like a high sacrifice. You're making a sacrifice to the gods specifically. An offering, well, a lot of people do. It depends. Again, we get into regional stuff. I always tell people that a sacrifice needs to be sacrificial in nature. It can be blood. It was very common for it to be blood in Germany. Early Sweden was blood, but then as Sweden became wealthier and wealthier, lots of things had higher value than animals. And once Sweden got to that point culturally, they actually stopped doing blood sacrifices and actually started sacrificing things like swords, bags of money, crap like that. And so it could vary, but I always tell people that a sacrifice needs to be sacrificial in nature. It should hurt somewhat to give it up. I mean, ideally, that's, you know, it should be a sacrifice for you to let go of it. Compared to an offering, which was very common. Sacrifices actually weren't that common historically when we look back. You only had 2, maybe 3 times a year. If you had money, like if you were a king or something, you might be doing, realistically, the average person might have done a sacrifice once a year, and it probably would have been like, you know, Yule or Midsummer, you know, more than likely. It's kind of a guess, but the common person did a lot of feinings, which were just offerings. And you could make offerings to the gods, but you could make offerings to land wights, which are like immortal beings tied to your environment.
Yeah.
I hate this term, but think of elves. Because the modern idea of elves actually comes from Hoothfolk, which are land wights, the European land wights. But I hate saying elves because then everyone has an image in their idea of what an elf should look like.
Looks like Orlando Bloom.
Whatever you're thinking of, you're wrong. That's not.
Orlando Bloom.
Yeah, no, that's not. But and so offerings are very common. You can make offerings to your ancestors, which is probably the most common offering that people were to their ancestors. The second most common would have been to land wights, to your environment, to things in your environment. But offerings could be made to gods, and there's several historical examples of famous people who made offerings to gods because they wanted some type of favor. But it wasn't some high season where they were actually making a sacrifice. It was more like, you know, wishing for luck in battle or something, and so they'd make an offering to God or to an immortal being that they thought would have their back. You know, this is where you get into lesser deities. You know, when we think of like high gods and low gods. Low gods were regional gods, whereas high gods kind of everybody recognized them. You know, and a prime existence example would be the difference between like Odin and Thor. Odin was a high god. Kings made sacrifices to Odin. You know, Odin wasn't a god you wanted talking to you or following you around or looking at what you're doing, because he was very complicated and he was very treacherous and he was very self-centered. And
like SJW.
Yeah. Well, no, maybe not really. His focus isn't on us as people. His focus is on his own people, which are other gods. So, you know, if you're a person and you're making sacrifices to Odin looking for favor, you better be badass. I mean, you better be like Beowulf badass. You know, otherwise, you don't really want his attention because it's just going to be bad. Compared to lesser deities, which were more common to people like Thor, which is a prime example of a god who actually cared more about us as a species. And there are lots of examples of people making sacrifices and offerings to Thor because they viewed that he actually gave a shit about what happened here. He was focused on keeping this world together as a whole. And so
what is your typical sacrificial offering? Got me thinking.
Again, it depends where you're at. Historically, today, it's mead. A lot of people brew mead and make offerings of that. Some people still do blood offerings. I tend to push people away from it because most people who want to do blood offerings haven't had the education to know how to properly raise and slaughter an animal humanely. And so I always tell people, you know, if you're going to try to be traditional and say, well, you know, I'm going to raise this animal, I'm going to raise a goat, which was probably the most common blood offering historically done throughout Scandinavian areas, and so, you know, or a horse. But I'm going to raise a goat, and I'm going to raise this goat to an adult, and then we're going to sacrifice it at Yule to Thor and make a big deal out of it. I mean, you know, my first question is, great, how are you going to sacrifice it? Have you looked into this? How are you going to kill, gut, clean, and prep that animal overnight to sacrifice it for Yule and to make a blood offering for Thor. Very few of them ever know. Like, they never have a plan. They don't know. They're like, oh, I figure I can look it up. I'm like, so then I tend to push people away from that. So a lot of people use mead. They'll brew their own mead. It can be expensive. There's a lot of work involved. It takes a lot of time. And so that makes a good sacrifice. Costs you money, costs a lot of personal time and effort. And then you're going to take that mead and everything you make, you're going to give to the gods. I'm like, okay, that's sacrificial in nature, and that's realistic to most people today. You could do that. You can look up how to do it. You can learn how to do it. It takes work and time, but the average person can figure out how to do it. Some people do money. I've sacrificed money and weapons more than once when I've done something really dumbass that I think I need to fix with my ancestors or the gods. In which case, yeah, then you bite the bullet a little bit and go big or go home, as it were.
Yeah. Now, Vince, we're personal friends, so I was allowed to sit in on and witness. Was it a Frithmoot? Is that what it was? I can't remember now.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't Frithmoot. It was a bloat.
A bloat. Okay. What's the difference between a Frithmoot and a bloat? Okay,
so Frithmoot, which is something I host, it's not a Frithmoot. It's my Frithmoot. That's a difference. The Frithmoot isn't something that happens everywhere. It's something that happens here.
Yeah.
Under mine and my wife's flag, under our house banner. Not really a banner, it's a bind rune, but under that mark. And so we host a moot. A moot is just a gathering of heathens for a specific purpose. People nowadays do pub moots all the time. And they're like, oh, well, what do you guys talk about? Who the fuck knows? It's a pub moot. You go to a bar, it's a bunch of heathens at a bar getting drunk. That's what it is. That's what it is. Maybe you talk about heathen shit. Maybe you talk about football. Who the hell knows? It's a bunch of heathens at a bar getting drunk. We do Frithmoot, which is something that my wife and I started for the Southwest to gather people who were interested in heathenry or were heathens who wanted to kind of get a better idea of who was in the community and who was around and what were they doing here in the Southwest. And so we called it Frithmoot, which is kind of a weird term. By definition, it's a public gathering of people. Technically, the technical term would be grith, not frith, but for the sake of this. It is a limited piece for a limited time in a limited space. And what that means is that I put up my word that if you come out to this event, there will be no politics, there'll be no bullshit, there'll be no violence. And by violence, I mean violence against you. We're a bunch of heathens and we're drinking. There's going to be lots of violence, but it's not going to be specifically focused on any person, on hurting someone. Right. And so that grith is my promise. It's my guarantee that if you come out, if you leave your politics at the road, everyone else will leave their politics at the road, and we're just going to all keep the peace for this limited amount of time in this one section. Which means that I actually have to be able to do that.
Yeah. So I was at a bloat then. What exactly is a bloat?
So a bloat is a sacrifice to a deity. That's an actual, which that bloat you were at, we did a mead sacrifice. And that mead was honey we had brought back from Sweden. So we had bought it in Sweden and then brought it back. It took about 3 years to make. And we put up 3 bottles for Frigga. So, a couple $100 worth of mead, 3 years worth of time. Not to mention, what was probably illegally bringing honey over from. Nobody asked, so we didn't tell anybody. I don't know if you can legally bring it over or not. Yeah, totally. Nobody said nothing, so we were just fine with it.
That's awesome. So let's move into symbols now. You always see Thor's hammer around, and there's different derivations of it. Like you have that one. You actually created that one, right?
Yes. The hollow hammer is an American heathen product, so this is something that I made because I wanted it. It's based off a poem, a short little poem that I wrote. It was actually a sentence that I talked about during one of my lectures, and then I wrote it down and people liked it. And then I made the hollow hammer as an image actually off of it. And then I decided that I actually wanted a hammer. So that started a whole. That's where American Heathen came from, actually, was from this hammer. This specific, first one ever made. It's titanium. It's the one that I kept. And that's where American Heathen products all came from. So I wrote this poem that says, our deeds create the mold that will cast the hammer worn by our children. And then that gave me the idea for an image, and I created like a word image that looked like this hollow hammer. Only it's built out of words, different values and ideas that heathens hold true. And then that gave me the idea to actually create a hammer. So then I created a Photoshop image of this hammer, and I tried to get a jeweler to make it for me. Like, dude, I've got money. You know, people are like, oh, it's going to cost like $1,000. I'm like, what the fuck ever? Just make me the damn hammer. I couldn't get anybody to make it for me. Like, literally, like 4 years. People are telling me they can do it, and then nothing ever happens. And
I'm used to that.
And we just go back and forth. And so finally I just said, fine, screw you guys. I'm going to figure out how to do it myself. And I figured out how to do it myself, and then I made one. And then other people thought it was really cool. And so then I made a couple as gifts for other people, for friends. And then a lot of people were like, dude, I'd totally buy one if you made them. And so then I started making hammers. And then I started making other stuff. And the next thing you know, American Heathen Products. Yeah. I had to put a name on it. And I'm a designer, so got to come up with a brand. Got to have a brand strategy. You got to have a marketing plan. Because I'm a designer, and if I didn't, I'd be weak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So, do you want to plug that here?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking we would get all that at the end where everybody can find them and everything like that.
For sure.
Yeah. Now, the hammer itself, though, what's the significance of the hammer?
So the significance of a Thor's hammer. So there's actually a lot of symbols that are relative to heathenry. The Thor's hammer is very common, and now we're going to get into kind of a mix of both factual data and my opinion. Right? This is here. So I believe today it's the most commonly worn heathen symbol because historically it was the most commonly worn that we know of. And so by that, it is one of the oldest religious symbols within European pre-Christianism that we found that was worn. Not the oldest found, but the oldest found that was worn, that we found it on pendants and on cords and chains and stuff like that. But it became very common when Christianity started to come into Europe. Wealthy Christians wore hammers. Or not hammers, they wore crosses. Big jeweled crosses. It was very common culturally for heathen Europeans to wear their wealth. They wore things that showed people how wealthy they were. Because your wealth was a sign of your luck. Your luck was a sign of your value to your tribe. So people wore their wealth. They wore gold armbands, which was really common. You see a lot of those historically found. It's where the idea and principle of wedding rings come from. They wore really fine clothing. When you watch like the Vikings show, the TV, the Vikings, that's not how they looked. They actually wore bright clothing that was very expensive and hard to make. They immaculately cleaned themselves. They looked good. They wanted to look good because that was a sign of their value. So when Christians started showing up wearing crosses, heathens started wearing hammers as a sign that they believed in the old ways. And another means to show their wealth. And so what we found, both in burial mounds and especially at battlefields, where you had these big battles where heathens fighting against Christians, or heathens fighting against other heathens, or heathens fighting against somebody else. They like to fight. What can you go? There was a lot of fighting going on. Other things happened in between. That was it. You'd see a lot in these big burials, you see lots of hammers. So it was this very common thing. And I think that carried over today's time. When we see the rebirth of Asatru and Heathenry globally coming out in the 60s, actually before that, it originally started before Hitler took over in World War II, was the first kind of come around, and then he kind of put a squash on it. And then in the early 60s, you start to see it coming back again. And then the late 60s, it's really picking up in the United States. And a lot of people are already going to a hammer. And I think that's because we had so much historical evidence of it, it was a very common image that people could relate to. We knew culturally Europeans wore it as a sign of protection from Thor, who was a person's god. He loved people. And as a sign that they were heathen. And so I think I feel like that just got adopted on to people. So a lot of people now, a lot of Europeans will wear it just as a cultural symbol for luck. I know a lot of Swedish and Norwegian soldiers that have bought hammers for me that aren't heathen, but they're Swedish and Norwegian and they're soldiers, and for them, wearing a hammer is a sign of protection from the gods, which I always think is funny. If you're Christian, you don't really believe in these other gods, but that's a cultural thing. I won't get into that. But a lot of people have started wearing, you'll see them wear the hammer just as literally a sign that they believe in the old god.
So there's other things like there's those open-ended bracelets. I forgot what they're called.
Torque.
Yeah. Is there any significance to the torque?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of significance to it. I wouldn't say religious significance per se, but it was very culturally common. And I've got a thick neck torque, and then a couple of wrist ones. So the torque, which is basically just a braided precious metal bracelet or necklace, was a very common way to A, collect wealth, B, wear your wealth for people to see it, and have a measurable system for trade. Those knots all actually mark something. So that's what a lot of people don't realize is the original purpose of knot work, whether it's Celtic or Scandinavian or whatever, is this marking system that literally, if you were out as a trader overseas and you needed to trade silver or gold for something and you didn't have coin in your pocket, you could literally take off a bracelet, and if it was 4 gold pieces and a gold piece was half an ounce in that area, the markings told you how much gold was on your wristband. And you could literally take off a bracelet and pull your axe out and chunk off the exact amount that you needed to give to them. And so it became this that's how it started. And then it just became this very culturally related. And now you start to see the development of family knotworks, regional knotworks. Different countries had different kinds of knotworks that developed. And so it just became this kind of craftsman level thing that just became part of the culture.
Yeah.
Well, as far as the symbols go in 2019, obviously there's been some controversy surrounding some of them and a lot of misnomers. Is there anything you'd like to kind of clear up here as far as, misnomers in regards to that?
Well, there's a lot of misnomers about heathen symbols in general. So we can go over the big one, which is going to be the fly flot, and this is the swastika. Hitler used a very specific form that was not used in any other historical sense, and that is the big squared off sun wheel and the white circle on the red background, which is unique to Nazis, the German National Socialism. But historically, you see it in lots of other uses and lots of other ways. But a lot of people tend to focus on that as that's a Nazi symbol. It's not a Nazi symbol. It's never been a Nazi symbol. It's always been a religious symbol. It's not even a religious symbol just to heathen Europeans. If you go to India, you'll see it everywhere. It's a huge religious symbol there. You see it in South America as a religious symbol still today. But people get stuck on that a lot. So that's a big one that I always like to tell people. Just because you see it, if it doesn't look like the neo-Nazi flag, it's probably not a hate symbol. And then you get a lot of the runes have become, and they're not actually hate symbols, but in the late 1980s, early 1990s, federal organization came out with a list of prison hate symbols that were related to gangs that had to do with like the Aryan Brotherhood and stuff. And so a lot of the Germanic runes got labeled as hate symbols. They're not hate symbols, they're letters in an alphabet. That's what they are. They're nothing
like the wolf's hook.
Yes, yeah. That's all it is. It's, sure, can some racists use it as a piece of hate symbol? Well, of course they can. I'm pretty sure the KKK uses the Christian cross as a hate symbol. That doesn't mean the Christian cross is actually a hate symbol, although I could argue that it is. But a lot of Christians are going to say that just because KKK uses it doesn't mean it's a hate symbol. It's the same thing. A Nazi can say whatever he wants, and it's going to be hateful. That doesn't mean everybody who says that is a neo-Nazi.
They don't have a monopoly on any symbols.
Yeah, like the number 88 too. It's a number, but
it's a number. But now the relative to that, when you see 1488, that's a unique thing. So 14 is relative to the 14 words. So David Lane, who was a Nazi racist killer, wrote the 14 words. And I don't remember them off the top of my head because they're the 14 words. This is one of the things that I see misused a lot. There's a lot of people that want to utilize the 14 words as a cultural expression rather than as a racist dogma. Except for the fact that David Lane wrote it as a racist dogma. He was very specific about it. He came out and said, even before he was dead, people tried to turn it into a cultural thing. And he came out and said, no, this is about white supremacy. Came out and said it. So therefore, the 14 words is a white supremacist dogma. That's what it is. So if you use it and then say you're not a racist, you're a shithead. Don't say racist shit if you're not a racist. And if you say racist shit, I'm going to assume you're a racist, and that's just how it is. 88 refers to the 88 precepts that Hitler wrote. Which a lot of them are just ideas that he wrote down, but a lot of them are actually very white power, white supremacy, kill everyone who's not freaking German, which I always find funny too when people want to talk about white. Hitler actually wanted to kill everyone who was German, not just who wasn't white.
Yeah.
If you were white and American, you were still on his hit list. I'm just pointing that out.
Yeah.
He didn't like you either. But so the 1488 is relative. I try not to jump on the 88 thing because a lot of people don't realize in like search engine algorithms and naming algorithms. So when you go onto a website and you're creating like Facebook as an example, and you're trying to create a profile on Facebook and you can't find a name, maybe your name is, John Smith, and you can't find John Smith's not available, and so you're looking for it, and so you hit that button that tells you to give you an example. Tagging 88 on the back of the name is actually the most common. And so I assume that means algorithms don't understand the purpose of putting an 88 behind the name. So
Yeah.
just because I see an 88 behind someone's name, I don't automatically assume they're a Nazi. I assume they may have just hit that automatic button on the make me a name, and the algorithm stuck an 88 behind it.
Yeah.
But if you see 1488 behind somebody's name, they're a Nazi. I mean, it's a Nazi thing.
Yeah, weird. So earlier you mentioned fighting. There was a lot of fighting back then, and
yes.
all that thing. Now, isn't there a fighting system, and aren't you highly involved in that?
Yes. So I have a fight system. I prefer to call it a fight club. So that's the Krieger and Vey. Yeah. So the Krieger and Vey is a combative European fight club. We work on traditional European combative techniques in a modern format. But I hesitate to call it a system because there were lots of systems and they weren't very systemized. And I'm not teaching anything that isn't taught by any HEMA. So a HEMA is a historical European martial arts club. I'm teaching the same stuff they would. I've simply organized it so it's more focused on modern combat. And the focus is on hand-to-hand combat, whereas most HEMA studios, their focus is on fencing. So it's on swordplay. Originally, when we started the Krieger and Vey, we were very focused on Glima, which is and combat Glima, which is specific to Scandinavian Vikings. Glima was Viking wrestling, and then we realized that through research that when you start looking at all the Scandinavian countries, you get into a lot of competitive folk arts like Schwingen and Backhold, and then there's Russian, which I never know how to pronounce any of the crap in Russian. But there's a Russian folk wrestling, which actually involves a lot of boxing and stuff. And so then we started putting together all of these pieces, and that was at the point when we said, okay, we're not going to call Krieger and Vey a system. We're just going to call it a fight club, combative European fight club. You can come here, we're going to focus on hand-to-hand combat, we're going to focus on modern self-defense, but we're going to use these very old traditional techniques that were very combat-orientated. I mean, you're talking about literally a time and place where people's lives were on the line from other people trying to kill them on almost a daily basis. It was very commonplace. And so the idea of a young man being very skilled at being able to kill another young man was important. That was a highly valued skill set. So the combat that arranged in that time period was very combative, it was very aggressive, it was very tactical, and it was very realistic. And so when we bring those to today, there's very little change that needs to get done to them. Actually, most of them have to be kind of pacified a little bit, because killing someone in self-defense in the 7th century was no big deal. Killing somebody in self-defense is still a big deal today.
Yeah.
So, killing somebody for any reason today is a big deal. So ideally, hopefully it's for self-defense.
Yeah.
And so, Krieger and Vey just literally means the fighter's way, or a warrior's path, or a fighter's life. Actually in Scotland, they have the Kriegren. The Kriegren is a name for whiskey. It makes you want to fight. And so it's. I wanted to avoid the when I put a name to it being overly theatrical. So I wanted a name that was literally more about the physical act of fighting than like with Bushido, where it's very philosophical and life orientated.
Yeah.
The Krieger and Vey is very combat orientated and not life orientated. I'm not trying to make people really nice people. Hopefully, you'll become a better human being just by hanging out with me. But ideally, I'm trying to make people better fighters.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Are you familiar with Operation Werewolf or Jack Donovan?
Yes. Big fan of
Okay.
Jack. And Operation
gonna-
Werewolf technically came before Jack Donovan. Jack Donovan became a part of Operation Werewolf.
Yeah, Wolves of Inland.
Yep.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
I'm familiar with many of the Wolves of Inland. And
Yeah,
I
it
know
seems like a great organization.
a lot of people would argue that. And when it first started, it was a little sketchy. Like that first year, I remember the first year they came out and they started posting photos from their first event. And I had doubts. Like there was some sketchy shit in the photos. So then I was wondering, I'm like, dude, is this just a bunch of violent neo-Nazis looking for a reason to beat each other up? And like it was just sketchy. But by year 2, it looked like a men's club.
What was some of the sketchy stuff that you saw?
Do masculine stuff, and who happened to be heathen. I'm like, okay, this isn't a bad thing. A lot of people have issues with it. I'm not one of those people. I actually think it's pretty great. The way they handle their tribe, the way they handle not only becoming part of it, but maintaining your rank in it and stuff like that. I think it's very tribal. Whether it's historical or not, I can't say. I'm not part of the Wolves of Inland. And so I have only a passing familiarity with it. But it's very tribal and it's very theirs, which I think is really important because that becomes the real issue in making a tribe, whether it's Scandinavian or heathen or something else, is that your tribe has your tribe stuff. The Wolves of Inland is a tribe who has their own tribal shit, and it is theirs. And if you want to know what it is, you better be willing to do some work to figure it out. Otherwise, just move along.
Right.
And I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah. So, Vince, I want to take it back a little bit because you mentioned Kindred, and I know that you've said that I, meaning me, am in the in regard. Regard. So, can you explain like exactly what a Kindred is and the levels that there are in it?
Yeah. So we have inner guard, which is something that I've told you. You're part of our inner guard. You're part of my inner guard.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's inner guard, and then kindred is like a tribe. So a kindred is just it's a Scandinavian word. It's an old Scandinavian word, Proto-Germanic, but it has to do with your tribe. A kindred is just a name for family that's not necessarily blood.
Okay.
Although historically, which is funny, when you get into Proto-Germanic, when they referred to kindred, they probably did refer specifically to blood because almost all tribes and Proto-Germanic tribes were all related to each other.
Mm.
Very few of them had people in the tribe that weren't somehow related to everyone in the tribe. They were basically like large farmsteads, what they were.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is kind of family. Now we look at it as family, whether family by choice, not necessarily by blood. Inner guard are all those people that have an inner aspect or a direct effect on your personal life, whether by choice or not by choice. I have people in my inner guard that are not my inner guard by choice, but they're inner guard because they're required to be because of the life I want to live today. You're inner guard by choice. I don't have to let you into my inner guard. I choose to.
Right. Yeah.
And so when you start getting into inner guard and then tribe, you get these levels today. So in the old days, it was really easy. Inner guard literally meant inside the fence, and there was Utgard, which was outside the fence. Everyone who lived in your village was inner guard. Everyone who didn't live in your village was Utgard. Done. Simple, clean line, easy to understand.
Yeah.
In today's world, I like to view it as overlapping circles. There's different ranges of stuff. Social media, the ability to communicate on a global level instantly, as well as the fact that we live in this very universalist accepting society, has created this idea where we have different levels of inner guard. So I like to think of it like a ranch. I have this big ranch, and there's a big fence around my property. And then I've got neighbors. They're not inner guard, but they're close to my inner guard. I know who they are. They might hang out in the fence. I might talk to them, but they're not coming over and helping me take care of the cattle or mow my yard or anything like that. But they're close. They're outer guard, but I don't consider them outsiders. They're outer guard, but I talk to them. I know them by name. Maybe I like them. Maybe I don't, but I still respect them because they're my neighbors and I don't want to be fighting over dumb shit. And so there we go.
Yeah.
Then there's outsiders. These are people past that. People I don't know. And so today I always like to use the example of that that homeless guy on the street. People say, well, why don't you give that money to the guy? He looks like he needs it so bad. Not my tribe, not my problem. Dude, that's just some guy in the street. I don't care. That guy doesn't care about me, and I don't care about that guy, and neither of us should. It's just the world. And so we need to send money to starving people in Ethiopia. They have their own inner guard. They have their own country. They have their own government. They have their own. They don't need my money. Take care of your own.
Send them suitcases because food doesn't grow in the desert.
Right? It's just they can do their own thing. They're completely out of guard. They have no value to me because they literally, if they died, if an entire chunk of South Africa was literally wiped from the face of the planet like it didn't exist, just bing, gone, would my life change? No, not even a little bit. So why do I have to put value in that? Don't. And that's the principle of inner guard. The more you come inside my fence, the more value you have to me because I'm allowing you inside my fence. And
There's
so
a lot
this
of
is where
parallels between that and Satanism.
This is where my emotional support goes, or even my financial support or my resources. And so this is where normally, historically, anyone inside that fence is all equal. Today, that's not necessarily the case. So, like, I have to treat my boss at work. I have to treat my boss at work better than a stranger. They are now inner guard. Not because I want them to be, but because I don't want to get fired and I don't want to have to go look for another job and I don't want my job to suck and I'd like to get a promotion. And so I'm going to treat them better than I would a stranger. So they're inside my fence. Where I've broken that down in a modern sense is now in a modern sense as heathens, we also have to have within our inner guard our house. So you might be inside my fence, you're on my property, you're on my yard, I'm treating you nicer than I would a stranger, but I'm not letting you come to my home and use my bathroom. I'm not inviting you over for a barbecue. I'm not sharing a beer with you at work over lunch or anything like that. I'm just nicer to you than I am a total stranger. I'm probably nicer to you than I am the average person I say hello to on the street. But you're not coming into my home. And so this is where we get into that tight inner guard, where we're starting to look at people who are tribe. So these are people that are literally like family. And I like to hold this value. So a lot of people talk about, a true friend is someone that'll, a friend a true friend will help you hide the body. I forget the whole saying. And
that's all you need to know.
Yeah. That I always look at that inner guard is that's literally it. If you're inner guard, I'll help you hide a body. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences for you killing somebody. It means I'm going to decide whether those consequences involve the law. Which they probably will. It depends why you killed them, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, that now becomes something where if somebody's in my tribe, and we'll use Helgi as an example. John knows who Helgi is, he's a friend of mine. So if Helgi called me in the middle of the night and said, Vince, I killed a guy, and I need to do something, I don't know what to do. I'm going to get up and I'm going to go out and help him. And then in the morning when we're all clear-headed, I'm going to decide whether or not I'm calling the cops or what goes beyond that. And there might be cops called on that kind of stuff. But it's that kind of thing. Literally, I've had people that are in my kindred call me in the middle of the night, literally 3 o'clock in the morning, broke down in the desert. They're like, you're the only person I've been able to get on the phone. I don't know what to do. I don't have trouble. I'm like, dude, I need help. And I get up 3 o'clock in the morning and I drive my ass out there and fix their car or tow it back or, Anyway.
I've used your bathroom. I've used Vince's bathroom.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, John's on the porch. John's really close inner guard. He's on the porch.
Yeah.
And so Kindred becomes that modern tribe. And so, but it's like a tribe that you're choosing that people volunteer to be a part of. Yeah. You have rules and guidelines that you're through, the rules that give you value within your tribe, and you participate in that and remain part of the tribe, or you don't and you get kicked out. And it's not the 8th century Iceland. I can't cleave your head open and put your head on a pole if you do something dumb. So.
I certainly like the values behind all of it, but I think it's very common sense.
Well, it is. It's very pragmatic. That's what I lecture to when I talk at the colleges. Is I usually spend more time focused on the pragmatic aspects of heathenry because I think they can help anybody, whether you're heathen or not. Relevant. Yeah. The ideas and principles of inner guard and tribe, I think, help everybody. But then again, I'm very anti-universalist, so there are people who disagree with me on that.
Yeah, we do. I do the talks with Vince to the college kids and stuff, and there's just so many similarities between Satanism and heathenry.
That was the point I made a minute ago. Yeah.
You take out the gods. you take out the land whites, and maybe some of the ancestor stuff.
Yeah.
And they're pretty much the same. Yeah.
Awesome.
There's not many differences other than that.
So is there a set of tenets for Asatru that
Sort
one
of.
can easily
So there's
access?
ways to look. Yeah, well, there's the 9 noble virtues,
Okay.
which are very common. Now, this is a modern construct that people created to try to give people a sense of creating. And here's my problem. I love the 9 noble virtues, but I constantly will talk about the problems with the 9 noble virtues. Because I think for them to have value, you have to understand what's wrong with them before you can give them value. But a lot of people say, oh, Vincent, because there's this line, there's heathens who hate the 9 noble virtues and heathens who love the 9 noble virtues. I really like the 9 noble virtues because I understand everything that's wrong with them. So there. The 9 noble virtues were created by the Odinic Rite in the mid-60s as kind of a virtue system to try to create a universal concept of ethics for heathenry. The problem with that is heathenry doesn't have a universal concept of ethics. Ethics come from your tribe. So the nice thing about the 9 noble virtues is, as a modern construct, they give you, if you're new to heathenry and Asatru, they kind of give you a basic of stuff to try to be a better person. But they're pretty universal in general. And so if you don't understand what a heathen worldview is, if you don't understand things like tribe and inner guard and orlog and weird and some of these like root value worldview stuff, then the 9 noble virtues are just 9 general cool ideas that exist in every religion globally, and they really don't necessarily matter. But there are some concepts within the 9 noble virtues that are pretty universal as far as ethics go to heathenry. Hospitality is a big one that I always like to point out, because really nobody's going to argue with hospitality in heathenry. It's very well documented in the lore, very well documented in heathenry. It's very well documented in archaeological finds that hospitality was important. I usually have to premise that with hospitality was not generosity. These are very different things. Generosity and charity are very much Christian ideals that have to do with universalist belief. Hospitality is basic common courtesy that you provide to somebody you invited into your home. And so then there's that last part. Hospitality means if I meet you on the street, I say, hello. That is the only thing I'm required to do as a heathen for hospitality purposes. Anything I do beyond that is just because I feel like it or something like that. Like that's it. If I meet somebody, I say hi, I shake their hand, it's nice to meet you. That's it. That is the extent of required hospitality that my religion says I should provide. If I invite you to my home, that's something different. And so even if you're not inner guard, if for whatever reason, like maybe I'm kissing my boss's ass for promotion, I don't know anybody who does this anymore, but I invite them to my house for dinner.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm offering a different level of hospitality. Now I'm requiring myself to do certain things. Now that also hospitality works both ways as a heathen. There's hospitality by the guest and hospitality by the host. And so this is a global ethical thing. Anyone who's any kind of heathen knows that hospitality is important. It was important to all of the European tribal ideals, and it was because they traded with so many people so often that if you didn't have that basic understanding of common hospitality to someone who invited you to their place or you invited to yours, you weren't going to be a very good businessman. You were going to starve and die.
So if you invited someone into your home and they either say annoyed you or were rude and disrespectful, then you could treat them cruelly and without mercy, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. And that's the idea.
Yeah.
A lot of people have this idea of Christian hospitality when you use the word hospitality. You invite someone to your home and they're a really shitty guest, but you still have to be nice to them because that's the Christian thing to do. No, I don't. I invite somebody to my home, I'm nice. They're shitty guests, we're done. Like, this is over.
That's a very satanic, aspect to it as well, yeah.
It's all gone. I gave you an opportunity, you were a douchebag, we're finished. I owe you nothing now.
Yeah.
And,
I like it.
So hospitality is one. Courage is one that a lot of people like to argue with, but realistically, if you've read the lore and you've read the history, courage on an individual level was a really big deal to all of the European tribes. How you presented that courage is open for interpretation, but I would even say that nowadays people have taken it way too far because it was a very open, public kind of courage. Standing up on Facebook for a value that you hold does not count as courage because everybody does. You're a keyboard warrior. You can hide behind pseudonym, and you can hide behind false photos, and you're not putting anything at risk by putting it out there. There's nothing courageous about that.
Nothing courageous about that. Yeah.
No, and it's the same thing. I've had people tell me that, not saying something that you really wanted to say at your job was a sign of courage because you're keeping your job. No, that's a sign of common sense that you want to keep your job. The courageous thing is if you see something that's wrong that needs to be said, you say it despite the fact that you might lose your job. Now, I'm not saying you should say it and lose your job, but that is the courageous thing to do. Sometimes common sense has to outweigh that.
Self-preservation, right.
So
Yeah.
I don't have the resources to spend another 6 months looking for another job, so I'm going to suck it up and keep my mouth shut. John knows I'm not very good at that. I'm not very good at the suck it up and keep my mouth shut.
Me neither. I get it. So, Jeff, you had a question about music, right? Something about...
Yeah, it's maybe a little on the superficial level, but I was just curious what your thoughts were on, say, Viking metal, whether that be something old like Bathory or, something a little bit more newer, which is like Amon Amarth, for example.
So, I personally like Amon Amarth's newest album. Not a huge Amon Amarth fan. Like, I put that out. I don't have a bunch of their records. I've always been a big fan because I think of the Viking metal scene, which I'm not really into now. Like, I wish I had known what Viking metal was when I was in high school, because I was into all kinds of thrash metal and death metal, and I had no idea there was a whole Viking metal thing. I was a grown adult by the time I figured that out, and I'm like, now I'm not really into that kind of metal. So, but Amon Amarth particularly, I really like them as musicians. The newest album I like. I don't really care much for any of the albums before. It's just not my kind of thing. But I've always liked them as musicians. Like, I really think they take it seriously, and their approach to their music and their sound and their fans, I think, has always been pretty legitimate. So I've always liked them as musicians. But the newest album is the only album that I really liked. I've got a few of them though that I bought. Not really into the Viking metal scene, but it's got its cool aspects to it and stuff like that. I've got some albums from Tyr. They've done a few songs that I like, although I'm not a fan of the band as people. And a lot of the Viking metal scene, I think my issue with it is it's about 50-50 down the middle. A lot of them play to the heathen crowd, but they're not heathens. And I think that's kind of bullshit. If you're not heathen, don't be heathen. You can play Viking metal and you can play up the Viking shit. You don't have to pretend to be heathen. And so,
it's
and then there's a lot of
with the satanic bands.
Exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah. And so, but I'm not huge into the scene. Most of the guys I know, it's because they're real heathen and they're online, and so they know me as American heathen. They've watched some of my videos and stuff, and so we've talked. But I don't necessarily listen to their music. They're just cool people that I know that I've talked to.
Gotcha. All right.
I'm more into like folk music. There's a few folk singers out there that have done some stuff. I can't think of. There's one guy that I really like, and I can't think of his name now. But he did like one album and was working on a second one, and then he kind of dropped off the planet. I think that's because it takes a lot of work to actually make an album and put it up on iTunes and stuff like that. And if you're just making heathen music to make heathen music, you're going to starve to death.
Right.
That's just how it is. It was Bill something. His name was Bill something. But and it was very country kind of folk music, but man, it's cool.
So, Vince, where can someone go to find you online? Your website, your products?
So wanderkindred.org is my Kindred website. There's a bunch of general information up there. I'll tell you right now, a lot of it's kind of outdated and old because I haven't updated that website in a long time. But my contact information is there. You can get some general information. You can get a hold of me there. You can go to AmericanHeathen.us. There's a landing page there, but most of my stuff's on Instagram. And that's right now. I'm on Facebook as Vince Enlund, but I log into Facebook like once a month. John will tell you he messages me, and I don't get it forever.
Yeah.
I tell people, if you know me, you should text me.
Yeah.
Because I have Facebook. You can find me. I'm on MeWe, for those people who are on MeWe, American Heathen and Vince Enlund. But Instagram's like the best place, Instagram or YouTube. So I made a YouTube channel. I've been up for a while, actually, as Vincent, and I posted a lot of my videos. And then recently I separated my videos into American Heathen so that my Vincent account is just personal stuff. And then all my Heathen stuff is on American Heathen, whether it's my products or whether it's the worldview videos and stuff like that. And then like 2 weeks after I made American Heathen its own channel, a bunch of people started stealing the name. So if you go to American Heathen, I'm the one with the hollow hammer. The one with the hollow hammer.
The
Not
original
the
one.
other ones. There's some crazy whack job guys calling themselves American Heathen, talking some really weird, not just racist shit, but I mean like crazy whack job, insane stuff.
We have that problem in Satanism too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, when I was a kid, anybody who wasn't a Christian was a heathen.
Yes, yeah, and that was it.
All that,
It wasn't
yeah.
a person was a heathen.
Yeah, right.
And it's funny the name, because the name is actually very historical, and it's just got to do anyone who didn't live in town. Originally, the Catholic Church created heathen because towns were built around churches, and so the Christians lived inside the walls next to the church. They lived in town. People who weren't Christian lived outside the walls in the heath. And so when they were talking about people who weren't Christian, they referred to them as heathens, people who lived in the heath. That was it. That's all the name meant.
Yeah.
You know, barbarian. Barbarian was just a term because they spoke poor Latin. That's all it meant, is that they spoke crappy Latin.
Yeah. So where can someone go if they view the video and they're really interested in heathenry in general or specifically Asatru? Where could they go to get the best information?
I think just contact me. And I've got some book lists that I put out.
Mm-hmm.
I usually tell people there's a book called We Are Our Deeds. You can order it through Lulu Press. Don't go to Amazon. You can buy it there. You'll spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on it because they have it marked as an out-of-print book. But if you go to Lulu, you can still buy it in print. It's like $17, $18.
Oh, cool.
The average person, not me, I'm dyslexic. It takes me like a week to read it. My wife can read it in like 2 hours. I mean, it's not a really thick book. I don't even think it's 200 pages.
Oh.
And it's very specific. It's not talking about Asatru or heathenry as a whole. It's only talking about inner guard and why that's important to your ethics. But I always tell people, read that first, because if that book makes sense and you like it and you understand it, then there's a ton of other stuff you can read about Asatru and heathenry. But if you don't, if it doesn't make sense or you don't like it or you don't understand it, don't bother. Don't bother with anything else.
Yeah.
Because that's the basis that everything has to come off of. If you don't understand inner guard or it doesn't make sense or you don't like it, walk away. Just move along. Too many people that go to the lore, they'll read the Poetic Eddas or they'll read the Havamal or Beowulf, and they'll go, oh, I want to be a heathen. That's a very singular cultural aspect that you're reading, and you don't really know what it is to be Asatru or heathen by reading that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like reading the Bible and understanding how to be Christian. If you read the Bible and that's it, and you understand how to be Christian, it's because you're God. I don't, because there's nothing in the Bible that really defines how to be a good Christian. There's just a bunch of random weird shit in the Bible.
Well, it's like the Satanic Bible. You know, when you read that, you either see yourself reflected in it or you don't. And if you don't, you're not a Satanist.
And you just move along. Yeah.
Right.
So I tell people that read We Are Our Deeds first. The average person read it in a couple hours. You either understand it, and if you don't understand it, read it a second time. But if after that is you're like, this is just weird shit, just keep going. Just don't bother with anything else, because everything else is just going to be entertainment.
Yeah.
But if it does make sense, then the Poetic Eddas. If you're an academic level reader, Culture of the Teutons 1 and 2 are incredibly, like, if you're a high academic level reader, like, you're a good reader. You have a very high level vocabulary, academic, like professor level vocabulary kind of thing. If you read Culture of the Teutons 1 and 2, you know how to be Asatru or how to be.
Yeah.
Okay. But the problem is those books were literally doctoral theses. They weren't written to be books for a person to read. They were written by a professor for other professors to review about his historical and archaeological research. So a lot of people have a lot of trouble reading it. It's hard to read. I'm a smart guy. I have 3 degrees, and I have a lot of trouble reading it. Of course, I'm also dyslexic, so that just screws with me in general. But I know tons of people who are very smart who can't get past chapter 2. They're just like, this is boring ass shit. I'm just done.
Vince, we want to thank you for coming on, man. This was enlightening. To, give us a good understanding.
Highly
of
informative.
Asatru and Heathenry, the differences
I've
there.
been curious about it, and you've answered a lot of my questions, so appreciate it.
Awesome.
So we'd like to have you on again sometime when we maybe get a panel together to kind of discuss.
That'd be
certain
great.
things. Yeah.
Talk about modern topics. I love to talk about modern topics as they relate to heathenry.
Yeah.
Cool.
That would be great for this show.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
Cool.
Good to
Cheers.
meet you.